This Mike Flynn story is getting better and better. Rachel Maddow broke a story tonight from a national publication that apparently the people in the White House, as early as the beginning of January, knew that Michael Flynn, their national security advisor, had been compromised, had lied to them, but they didn't do anything. And I'm talking specifically about him violating the Logan Act and dealing with the Russians regarding Obama's sanctions for the Russians interfering in our election process. Here's the clip.
To the question, not just of whether or not the national security advisor is about to be fired, but it also goes to how many people in the new administration knew the kind of trouble that National Security Advisor Michael Flynn was in. How many people knew about that and when they knew it? This is brand new reporting from the Washington Post, published just before we came on the air tonight. It's headlined, "Justice Department warned White House that Flynn could be vulnerable to Russian blackmail." Quote, "The acting attorney general informed the Trump White House late last month that she believed Michael Flynn had misled senior administration officials about the nature of his communications with the Russian government and warned that the national security advisor was potentially vulnerable to Russian blackmail." Now, you'll recall that the acting attorney general until last month was Sally Yates. President Trump fired her when she said publicly that she believed his Muslim ban was illegal and she would not have the Justice Department defend it. That view, by the way, has been borne out by many federal judges since she first put that in a letter to the new president. But before she was fired, she apparently told the White House that the national security advisor might be personally compromised and, again, vulnerable to Russian blackmail. The Post story tonight continues, quote, "In the waning days of the Obama administration, Jim Clapper, who was director of national intelligence, and John Brennan, who was CIA director, shared Sally Yates' concerns and concurred with her recommendation to inform the Trump White House. They feared that Flynn had put himself in a compromising position." A senior Trump administration official said that the White House was aware of the matter, adding, quote, "We've been working on this for weeks." For weeks, the Trump administration has known about this. For weeks, really. Joining us now is Adam Entis. He's the Washington Post reporter who broke this story tonight. Mr. Entis, thanks very much for making time for us tonight. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
So obviously the headline here and the lead graph are arresting, jarring. Why exactly did the acting attorney general Sally Yates conclude or surmise that the Russian government might be able to blackmail Mike Flynn, the national security advisor?
Right. So what happened was when this intelligence first came in, which would be in late December, early January, Yates saw the intelligence and was concerned that Flynn was potentially in violation of what's known as the Logan Act, which is a very obscure statute which would bar a non-government official from trying to influence another government's policies. And so that really wasn't, she knew that that was not something that would be pursued in court. There wouldn't be a prosecution based on the Logan Act. After Pence, the vice president-elect, and other top officials started speaking publicly in defense of Flynn when these calls when it emerged that these calls had existed, when they started to say things like, "I checked with Flynn, and I can tell you now categorically that the issue of the election sanctions imposed by the Obama administration were not discussed in his phone calls with the Russian ambassador." When Yates and Clapper and Brennan heard that, they knew, because they had read the intelligence, that that was not accurate. And so at that point, they knew that also the Russians knew themselves that what was being said was inaccurate, because Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, had reported to Moscow his conversation with Flynn. And so Russia knew that what was being said by the White House was not true, and the fear was that basically the Russians could try to use that information to put that over Flynn and to try to put pressure on him. And obviously also they were very concerned that the Vice President elect Pence seemed to have been misled.
So on that point about pressuring Flynn, let me just make sure that I understand this precisely. If the Russians knew that they had discussed sanctions, that Flynn had discussed sanctions with the Russian government, and they knew that he lied about it to the vice president and other senior officials, the Russian government conceivably could come to Mike Flynn, come to the National Security Advisor and say, hey, we want you to do this thing for us, and if you don't, we're going to tell the world, or we're going to tell the vice president, or we're going to tell the president of the United States that you've been lying to them. You wouldn't want that to happen, would you? You better do what we want.
I think it was less a concern that they would tell the president of the United States or somebody else. That I think the fear would be that they would actually just leak it publicly, and then Flynn would be obviously his reputation, his credibility would be tarnished. So that was the concern. And so by telling the counsel to Trump at the White House, the goal was to kind of take that leverage away from the Russians. So as long as people in the White House were aware that this was an issue, they could try to address it and try to mitigate the risk that this could compromise Flynn and potentially compromise the Trump administration in its future dealings with Russia.
Adam, do you have any information about how the White House counsel, how Don McGahn reacted to this information, or whether the Trump administration took any internal action that they haven't disclosed thus far publicly?
Yeah, I mean, so we know that Yates provided this information to the council sometime near the end of January, before she was fired. Obviously, there's a period of a couple weeks that have passed since then, and based on the surprise that Pence had to the breaking of the story last week, that Flynn had discussed the sanctions with Kislyak. I am surmising here, but I don't know for sure, that the council certainly did not share this information with Pence, the vice president. It's unclear really who he shared the information with. Also, we had an interview with Flynn last Wednesday in which he repeated what Pence had said, which is that Flynn had insisted that he had not discussed sanctions with Kislyak. So it appears, based on that, one would think that he was not aware. So frankly, I just don't know who the counsel at the White House consulted with about this.
That's incredible. I mean, that alone is remarkable. That something like this, something this explosive, comes to the office, the White House counsel's office, and then it doesn't get fixed. It's amazing. Adam Entis, Washington Post national security reporter. Thank you for helping us understand this scoop. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. There's three ways that this could have gone. Number one, when the information was shared with the White House counsel, they basically just sat on it. Now, I doubt that seriously, because McGahn is really close to Donald Trump. The second option, which is more likely, is that the White House counsel shared the information with Steve Bannon, and Bannon, in turn, went to Trump and told him that what was going on, and that he was going to work on fixing the problem, but it was going to take him a little bit of time. Nobody shared the fact that this was known with Vice President Pence. That's pretty likely, but not my number one shot here. My number one choice is that the White House counsel immediately went to President Trump and told them what went down. And Trump basically, because he's in the pocket of the Russians, figured out that, or suggested that he would take care of it. And now it is slowly metastasizing and blowing up in everybody's face. I like that last one best, because I always thought that Pence was a little too cozy with the Russians. And obviously that 35-page work paper indicated that the Russians had something on Trump. Now, that can't necessarily be proven, except that the Russians are snatching people left and right that would have been privy to providing that information, and these guys are either being incarcerated or straight out killed. So again, my money's on the last one, but that second one, with Bannon getting that information and trying to massage it, that one kind of works for me too.